Welcome back to the channel, friends. Today's story is one of awe, mistakes, and unexpected lessons in the heart of London. But before we dive in, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you love stories that move you, surprise you, or stay with you long after the video ends, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got another powerful story coming tomorrow, one you won't want to miss. Now, let's begin this unforgettable journey together. She made one mistake in London, and it changed everything. Emily Carter had always felt like she was born in the wrong place, or maybe just in the wrong century. Growing up in the bustling city of Chicago, her heart often wandered far beyond the Midwest. While her friends spent their time with sports, pop music, and social media trends, Emily found herself curled up in a quiet corner of the local library, flipping through books about European history and old British traditions. The royal family, the cobblestone streets, the red-coated guards standing like statues, she was captivated by it all. London wasn't just a destination on her bucket list. It was a dream she carried with her every single day. For years, she saved every penny she could. Birthdays, holidays, odd jobs, anything that could inch her closer to that plane ticket. While others booked tropical getaways, Emily kept a small jar in her room labeled London. It became a symbol of patience, of purpose, and of a promise she made to herself long ago, that one day she would walk those historic streets, not as a tourist snapping pictures, but as someone finally meeting a place she had already come to love. At 26, with her savings in place and her heart nearly bursting with anticipation, Emily boarded a direct flight from O'Hare International Airport to London Heathrow. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with excitement and the details of the itinerary she had carefully planned over the years. Museums, theaters, cathedrals, bookshops, every day was mapped out, but one moment stood above all the rest: the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace. She had read about it, watched it on YouTube, and imagined the sound of synchronized boots on pavement more times than she could count. As the plane took off, lifting her above the clouds, Emily stared out the window and smiled. This wasn't just a trip, it was the beginning of something personal, something she knew would stay with her for the rest of her life. She didn't know what stories were waiting for her in London. She only knew that she was ready to find them. And in her heart, she hoped that maybe, just maybe, one of those stories would find her too. Emily's first few days in London felt like living inside a storybook. Every step she took was filled with wonder. Museum halls whispered history, the air buzzed with culture, and every turn led her to a hidden corner of the city she had only dreamed of. She visited the British Museum, wandered through quaint bookstores in Notting Hill, and sat quietly in St. James's Park, letting the moment sink in. But there was one event she'd been saving, one she had circled in bold on her itinerary: the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace. This wasn't just another tourist stop for her. It was the heart of everything she had imagined London to be. That morning, she woke up early and carefully picked her outfit: a long beige coat, a navy scarf, and her favorite maroon beanie. It wasn't just for warmth, it was her lucky charm, something she'd worn on every meaningful trip. As she approached Buckingham Palace, the streets were already buzzing with people from around the world. She managed to find a spot near the gates, front row, camera in hand, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. Then the sound came, slow, steady, sharp. Marching boots echoed down the street, and the crowd fell into a hushed awe. The guards appeared in perfect formation, their red tunics blazing against the gray sky, their bearskin hats towering above the crowd. Emily watched in silence, her heart pounding. It was everything she had imagined and more. And then she saw him. One of the guards stood slightly apart, taller than the others, his posture flawless, his eyes fixed ahead. There was something magnetic about him. In that moment, the world around her faded. Without really thinking, a wild, impulsive thought crossed her mind. What if she threw her beanie toward him, just to see if he'd react? It seemed harmless, funny even, just a lighthearted moment for a camera roll. With a mischievous grin, she pulled off her beanie and flicked it toward the guard. It sailed through the air, landing perfectly, right on top of his head. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Laughter broke out. Cameras clicked. Emily's heart raced, proud of the attention she had drawn. But the guard didn't flinch. and from the corner of her eye, she saw a uniformed officer walking straight toward her. Fast, focused, and not smiling. Emily barely had time to process what had happened. 1 second, she was laughing along with the crowd, convinced she'd just created a funny, harmless moment. The next, the mood shifted. The uniformed officer moved through the sea of tourists with a calm intensity that made her stomach drop. His eyes locked onto hers, his expression unreadable. By the time he reached her, the laughter had faded into awkward silence. "Miss," he said, his voice firm but controlled, "do you understand the seriousness of what you just did?" Emily blinked, stunned. I I thought it was just a joke," she stammered, her voice suddenly small. The officer didn't raise his voice, but the weight of his words hit hard. "These guards are not actors in a show. They're soldiers, trained, armed. You may not see it, but what you did could be interpreted as a threat, or at the very least, deep disrespect." The crowd around her began to disperse, uncomfortable now, unsure whether they had just witnessed something funny or something criminal. Emily felt her face burn. This wasn't the light-hearted travel memory she'd imagined. It was quickly spiraling into something much more serious. "Come with me, please," the officer instructed, gesturing toward a nearby security station. Her legs felt heavy as she followed him in silence, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside the small office, she was asked for her passport and questioned about her intentions. The officer, though professional, didn't sugarcoat the potential consequences: fines, a formal warning, even deportation. The words sounded unreal, like they belonged in someone else's story. But they didn't. They belonged to her now. Emily's hands trembled as she answered each question. Her voice cracked more than once. Gone was the confidence from earlier that morning. In its place was a sinking feeling of guilt, embarrassment, and fear. How had a simple, silly gesture led her here? After what felt like hours, the officer returned. He handed back her passport and issued a stern warning. "You're not being charged today," he said, "but any further incidents, and you will face consequences." As she stepped back onto the busy streets of London, the city suddenly felt different. Colder, heavier. The beanie was gone. The joke was over. And all that remained was the weight of a lesson she hadn't expected to learn. The next few days passed in a blur, but the weight of what had happened clung to Emily like a shadow. She tried to carry on with her sightseeing plans, checking off landmarks, snapping photos, visiting markets, but nothing felt the same. The vibrant excitement she'd felt when she first landed in London had dulled. Everywhere she went, the memory of the officer's words echoed in her mind. "These guards are not performers. They are soldiers." Emily couldn't shake the shame. What she had seen as a funny, spontaneous moment had turned into a serious offense. She began to realize just how little she truly understood about the traditions she'd claimed to admire, and that realization hurt more than the warning itself. One night, sitting alone in a small cafe near Trafalgar Square, she opened her phone and began researching the King's Guard. What she found surprised her: the training, the discipline, the level of commitment required to stand in silence for hours, fully alert, regardless of the weather or the crowd. These weren't just ceremonial figures in red coats. They were real soldiers with real responsibilities. That was the turning point. Emily made a quiet decision. If she couldn't undo her mistake, she would at least try to understand the world she had disrespected. The next morning, instead of heading to tourist attractions, she found herself in the National Army Museum, absorbing every detail about the history of the British military. Later, she signed up for a guided tour titled "Behind the Bearskin: Understanding the King's Guard." The tour was led by a former guard who spoke with quiet authority and deep pride. He shared stories of discipline, tradition, and the burden of representing an entire nation while standing motionless in front of curious and often careless onlookers. With every word he spoke, Emily felt the sting of her actions a little deeper. She hadn't just thrown a beanie. She had crossed an invisible line, one drawn by centuries of tradition and honor. But instead of running from her mistake, she leaned into it. She listened. She learned. And slowly, something changed inside her. What began as embarrassment turned into respect. What started as regret became a quiet mission to grow. Emily wasn't just trying to redeem a moment. She was trying to become someone better because of it. On her final day in London, the air felt different, cooler, quieter, like the city itself knew something had shifted inside her. Emily stood once again outside Buckingham Palace, the same place where everything had started. But this time, she didn't fight for a front row view. She kept a respectful distance, standing behind the crowd, her hands tucked in her coat pockets, eyes focused, not on her camera, not on getting the perfect photo, but on the ceremony itself. As the guards began their iconic march, she watched with new eyes. She no longer saw costumes and spectacle. She saw discipline, legacy, human beings holding centuries of history on their shoulders. And then she saw him, the tall guard from before, the one who had unwittingly become part of her mistake. He passed with the same silent strength, but this time, when their eyes met briefly, she didn't smile. She simply nodded, small, sincere. To her surprise, he offered the faintest smile in return before continuing on. It was just a flicker, but to Emily, it meant everything. It felt like closure. Not approval, not forgiveness, but maybe acknowledgement, maybe understanding. Later that afternoon, as she wandered through a quiet bookstore near the Thames, a young woman approached her with a curious grin. "Hey," she said, "weren't you the one who threw her hat at the guard?" Emily froze, heart pounding. But the woman laughed. "I was there. It was wild. You've got guts, I'll give you that." Emily let out a breath, her cheeks flushing. "Yeah, not my proudest moment," she admitted. The woman shrugged. "We all do dumb stuff when we travel, but at least you've got a story, right?" Emily smiled, but this time it was different, soft, humble. "Yeah, I do. Just not the kind I planned for." As she packed her bags that evening, she tucked a small book into her carry-on, Guarding the Realm, the role of the King's Guard in modern Britain. It was her reminder, a symbol of everything she'd learned, not just about another culture, but about herself. She arrived in London as a curious tourist. She was leaving as something more, someone who had made a mistake, owned it, learned from it, and let it change her. And that, she realized, was the real journey all along. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Have you ever made a mistake while traveling? One that seemed small at the time, but taught you a big lesson later? Maybe you've witnessed a cultural misunderstanding or even been part of one. Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might help someone else avoid the same misstep, or maybe just remind us all how much we can grow from a single moment. Do you think Emily deserved the warning she got? Or was it all just an innocent prank gone too far? We want to know what you think. And if you're from the UK or have military experience, we'd especially love to hear your perspective. What does the King's Guard mean to you? What do you wish tourists understood better? Let's turn the comment section into a space for reflection, learning, and meaningful conversation. Don't hold back. Every comment helps build a stronger, more thoughtful community. And while you're down there, don't forget to hit like, share this video with a friend, and subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's powerful news story. Your voice matters here. Let's talk.